In 1860, a winter ledger in Vermont wrote lives that never touched air, names in a column, ages set to hours, a total underlined with the graphite certainty of county hands. Then the part the room could feel but would not say. The page beneath, remembered pressure without ink, letters pressed like footprints in snow that never saw the feet. The ledger was satisfied. The paper was not. This is not a short story, and it will not rush. Tonight we open the drawer, sit with the paper, and let the room's old heat breathe us slower. We place our palms on the beveled oak and listen. The faint hiss of lampblack, the cold of cotton gloves, the low hum of the building as if the rafters keep a count we can't yet read. You're welcome to stay, to rest, to let the story unfold around you like a wool coat taken from a nail and draped across your shoulders. Subscribe if you haven't yet. These files are long, and you'll need company on the way through them. And if you're listening now, tell me your country and the time. There's comfort in knowing we're scattered across the world, reading the same forgotten column. Folio 6, page 41. Badge mark. WS 1860 VT. On the left justified line where a name should live, there's a noun instead. Issue. The clerk's hand is steady until the tail of the J, then pressure increases where ink thins, a habit we'll learn by the second page. 4 entries later, a mother with no surname, only a mark, and the word seen. The infant beneath her is assigned an hour and a weight and a season. The midwife's book across town will later write a smaller line with larger consequence. Child not seen, yet signed. We will return to her. For now, we linger in this counting room that folds time the way paper remembers a crease. The edge of the desk is rubbed smooth where wrists have rested, grooves that welcome our own wrists as if the table practiced to receive us. Behind the ledger, a small dish of lampblack sleeps like rain caught in slate. The stamp device on the shelf keeps its rubber numbers backward in a line, 1 through 9, except the 2 carries a chip the size of a seed. Everything here remembers use more honestly than speech. Vermont in 1860 is supposed to tell simple stories. Town halls with clear windows, births and deaths counted like the season's apples, a county that files what it can see. But every simple story knows its shadow. In the hills, the old folk tales still work. The child exchanged, the name that isn't a name, the family who hears breathing where the cradle does not move. We will not call any of that true. We will let it stand beside the paper like a quiet neighbour at a fence, nodding. Line 12 carries the first wrongness we can name without myth. The clerk uses present tense in a register that should only speak past. Arrives, he writes, not arrived. Weighs, not weighed. A living grammar used to pin a line that's supposed to close. The underline is dark, decisive. Beneath the underline, the paper responds with a second shape. A ghost. Curve caught by raking light, the beginning of a 3, dented where the 2 should have ended. It is a habit too. Numbers that want to be more. Numbers that begin in pressure before the county lets them ink. Names that never lived should be easy to erase. You strike them once. The page is clean. But erasure is a verb the county uses only on mistakes that cost nothing. Where a number secures a subsidy, a road, a ration, the hand that holds the eraser trembles. Where a number pleases the donor, the board, the settlement auditor, the eraser never arrives. So, the ledger writes what the village cannot find, and a winter passes in which more children are recorded than cried. We test the words we'll have to use, not compatible, not aligned, not assigned. The column says assigned in the grammar of government. The paper under it says not assigned in the pressure of the hand that hesitated. We will watch that hesitation, travel across 3 books and 2 maps and a draw card that carries no ink at all. There is a photograph in a sleeve that does not belong to this year, a family arranged at a kitchen table, a cabinet card with matte edges. We won't use it for the impossible beat in this case. The image belongs to another boy in another file where silver refuses time. Here, our anomaly is quieter and more procedural. Beneath fiber writing, a curve that refuses to flatten, pressure that will not concede to blankness. If you dust the ledger with lamp black at a shallow angle, the particles settle in grooves you cannot see head-on. The grooves spell names, and the names are not in ink anywhere in the book. The clerk initials RS repeat at the right margin, a loop that finishes late when he is tired. On page 42, the loop finishes late where he is careful. The difference matters. It's how a witness in paper speaks. The pen says what the county wants. The pressure says what the hand knows. And the hand knows that on a Tuesday in February a child was not there, and on a Friday in March a number was needed. We will say, the word classified once, and then hold it at the edge of the table, because this room taught us how that word works. Classified doesn't only mean hidden, it means placed into a class where it can be counted towards something else. To classify names that never lived is to invent a class that pays. The word that doesn't belong in a birth column, eligible, will appear later in a margin like a cough that no one admits to. The county will say this is a copying error, a duplication, a bad week in a wet room. We will let them speak when it is their turn. Until then, we keep our eyes low and near, where fibers raise their backs against light. If you have ever pressed too hard on a list and returned the next day to find its shadow on the page below, you know what a ledger can refuse to forget. The paper is not haunted, it is honest. There's a line of folklore that wants to stand here and tell us a story about a changeling, a baby left by something not named, a mother who feels weight but not warmth, a family who keeps the cradle for fear of what will come if they set it down. Let it stand beside us and whisper. Then let us turn back to the language of the office. Folio, page, line, weight, season, initial, total. The myth is a metaphor. The mechanism is what harms. By the time we reach the bottom of page 43, the underline, under the totals, thickens like a voice clearing itself. The sum reads 19. When dust falls across the pressure below, a small crescent curves toward 20, then stops, unfinished, a decision lodged in fibre. The ledger chose its period. The paper asked for a comma. We will follow that comma into rooms, where commas are not supposed to live, into the midwife's register that calls a child, not seen, yet signed, into a census margin that uses a word this office does not use, into an overlay of maps where the bodies outnumber the beds and the beds outnumber the births. We will pick up a single test we can stage without theatre. Raking light, lamp black, a soft breath to move the dust and show the dent remain. For now we close the cover softly and let the drone of the building carry one more number to the back of your ear. US 1860, VT, Folio 6, P 41-43. The room has learned to keep quiet. The drawer has not. When we pull it, metal breathes against metal, and a blank card awaits, the kind that receives a name while the clerk is still deciding if the person deserves a line or a space. Across its top, where ink never touched, 3 shallow dents hover like options. Kept, not kept, still recorded. Don't close the file. The door does not say births or deaths, it says registry, in letters that a careful hand gold-leafed long, enough ago that the leaf has learned to tarnish where breath hits it. Below the word, a paper placard slides into a shallow brass frame. WS 1860, VT. Someone updates the year each January by trimming a strip from a larger sheet, the guillotine cut still crisp along the top edge. The strip for last year lies behind the new one like a second eyelid. The room prefers continuity to surprise. Inside, the air is wool and wood smoke. The stove in the corner does not shout its heat. It offers it in a low circle that warms wrists and lets ink behave. A kettle rides the back ring not to boil anything, simply to keep a line of steam lifting so the boards don't split. The smell is lamp oil and ledger starch, a slick note of iron from the binding corners, and something faintly sweet from the paper itself, sizing that learned its scent the year it dried and never forgot it. The table is oak with a beveled rim that has rounded itself under a century of wrists. On the near edge, where clerks habitually brace their elbows before beginning the total, there is a shallow curve that welcomes the radius bone, as if the furniture were anatomically literate. A cotton cloth lies folded once on the right, a ritual rag not for cleaning, for signalling readiness. We unfold it the way they did, with 2 fingers and a breath that steadies more than the cloth. On the blotter, 3 pale rings, where a water glass once sat throughout a winter of caution. The rings overlap like a failed diagram, kept, not kept, still recorded. We don't force the symbolism. The rings simply are. A slip of lampblack rests in a shallow saucer, the powder-like rain captured mid-fall. Beside it, a soft brush, whose bristles remember the curve of the clerk's thumb. The rubber stamp device sits on its stand with numerals reversed in a line. The 2 wears a chip the size of a seed. We will need the device later to think about time. For now, it is a small monument to how a room coordinates itself with a calendar. The window is single pane and proper, frosted at the lower corners, where a draftsman once etched his name, then thought better and burnished it almost away. Outside, Vermont's late winter builds its quiet arguments. Sugaring buckets hung from maple trunks, sleigh marks that write cursive through drifts and then disappear when the wind votes differently. We are not here to photograph that world. We are here to photograph the one that keeps it plausible. A placard on the wall reads, "Entries," extracts in small serif capitals, and beneath it 2 hooks hold 2 strings, one red, one twine. Red means you carry the book to the desk. Twine means you copy the book to the slip. Someone believed colour could organise a town's story. Someone may have been right for most days. There is a nail where a key hung, but no key hangs. Only a pale outline in the wood, and a darker arc where the ring polished the varnish thin. A set of gloves, cotton, folded left over right, waits in a shallow tray, stamped not for general use. Language borrowed from a larger office and misfit here. Our hands know the routine even if the sign does not. Left glove first, then right, then a small press of the thumb into the palm to say we are ready to touch the book without owning it. The ledger itself sits slightly canted by 2 pencil stubs, placed beneath its spine, an improvised cradle so the seam doesn't fight its years. When we lift the cover, the hinge speaks in cloth, not in squeak. Page edges have learned the town's air so well that they raise a fraction before they turn, as if greeting rather than yielding. We learned in beat 1 where the wrongness lives. Here, we learn how wrongness can be comfortable. A room that is allowed to be exacting makes our doubt feel polite. We inventory the small inhabitants. A hair trapped under paste at page 41, human and grey. A fleck of wax that does not match the room's candles. An oval scuff where a ring once touched and never returned. Each is a breadcrumb that refuses melodrama. Each says, this was handled by people who believed they were only performing a task. We note the material habits, that keep a county honest when it means to be honest. The pen nib sharpened against shell, then wiped, the loop of RS that tallies the day, the underlines that anchor sums. Then we note the habits that allow a county to stay quiet when it should speak. Present tense verbs in a past tense book, nouns where names should be, totals that finish with a flourish while the line beneath that flourish argues in fibre, as if the desk remembered more than the clerks who touched it. The phrase arrives uninvited and earns its place. We can feel, palm to oak, where someone hesitated before listing, a thing that did not happen. You don't get that from a copy. You only get it from a surface that has learned to hold hesitation like a temperature. There is one more sign, smaller, almost shy, tacked inside the cupboard door. Eligibilities and apportionments. The word eligibilities does not belong in a room that counts births and deaths. It belongs to budgets and to winter relief and to formulas that convert heads into sums. Vermont is not an abstraction. It is towns keeping their roads thawed and their poorhouses fed. But if you tie eligibility to existence and existence to a line in ink and that line to money, a room like this will learn to prefer ink that doesn't sweat. We promised you one folklore tangent, local and plain. There is a story in these hills, every hill has a version, about an upstairs window that stays unshuttered all winter. Not for light, for company. An attic child story, they call it at the feed store, with a half smile that protects them from admitting belief. A rocking horse kept near the eaves, a plate that is set and cleared, a name whispered but never spoken in the room below. We do not file that story under fact. We set it on the sill like a jar that catches drips from a roof seam. The jar fills when it rains. On dry days it sits empty and clean and waiting. Folklore does that. It holds the overflow when a ledger can't. Back to the desk. The quill split is clean. The nib refuses drama. A measure stick lies beside the blotter with 3 hash marks labelled folio, page, line in a clerk's training, hand. The human who made that stick wanted the next human to remember order. We will keep that order now. We align the stick's folio mark with the upper corner of the left leaf. 6. We align page with the Roman in the gutter. XLI to X3. We align line with the entry where issue should be a name. We prepare our tools not because tools prove anything, but because a room trusts you after you match its ritual. A raking light set at 10 degrees from the plane. A breath that we will release later to lift dust instead of speech. A camera that is allowed to be patient. We are not yet at the forensic beat. We are only setting the knife and the bowl and the board the way a kitchen does before bread. 2 chairs, one for the clerk, one for the witness. Neither upholstered, both tuned to the floor the way stools know the grain. We sit the witness chair for a moment, spine obedient to a posture that was expected of it. What sits across from a table for a century learns to keep backs straight. We do not call obedience a virtue or a vice here. We call it a system. Bodies learn rooms. Rooms train bodies. Paper is the long memory of that training. A small calendar hangs 2 months wrong, as if winter were a repeatable sentence. No one corrected it because no one needed to. The numbers that matter in here are written by hand. A pencil lies sharpened with a knife, one side flat from the blade. The graphite leaves shine where elbow grease polished it. Our hand fits its shine too easily. There are places where archives feel like strangers. There are places where they feel like mirrors. The placard on the door we passed, registry, is a courtesy. The true name is the one the drawer whispers when it opens a notch too far and the rails sing. Not a haunting, a habit. the sound a room makes when its purpose is used correctly. We slide the drawer closed and the rails answer. And the answer is a sentence that lives on the underside of steel in another file. Don't close the file. We take that as a rule of the building, not a superstition. We return to the ledger, to folio 6, pages 41 to 43, to the word issue where a name should be. We put one gloved fingertip on the lower margin and feel the fibers lift the way skin does when cold air notices it. We are ready to turn from wood and air and smell to the first official line. To let the book speak in the voice it thinks is the only voice it has. The room has done what it can. It has introduced itself without pleading innocence. It has shown us how hesitation looks when it becomes furniture. From here, record number 1 begins. The official entry, the copyable language, the first contradiction that doesn't know it is a contradiction. Yet folio 6, page 41 begins as any county book should. A ruled column, a clerk's steady hand, the slow architecture of ink that pretends to be final. The line reads, issue, female, born, March 3rd, 1860, weight, 6 labs, assigned hour, 2:14 a.m. Mother, Mary, no surname, witness, R.S. On its face, the entry is tidy, no blots, no hesitation marks. It satisfies what the board expects, a birth to count toward the quarter. Yet when we rest the page under angled light, the paper refuses satisfaction. The fibers argue. At the far right margin, the clerk initials RS. The loop of the S is usually neat, clipped in his hand at the end of long days. Here, it bleeds at the downstroke as though the nib hesitated, pressed too long. We could excuse this as fatigue. But under dusted lampblack, the downstroke doubles itself. A second pressure line without ink, travelling parallel, like a ghost limb shadowing the real one. The paper remembers a decision, the hand abandoned. The midwives, a register, held 3 towns over, will later mirror this hesitation with an annotation that reads, child not seen, yet signed. Both documents carry more than one voice. The ink's certainty, the pressure's reluctance. Every birth entry in March should have a corresponding line in the county's travel ledger, the log that records which midwife was summoned, which horse was taken, which time was billed. Folio 2 of the travel book skips from March 2 to March 4. There is no March 3. There is no travel record of a midwife called to Mary's cabin. Yet the ledger of births insists the child was delivered that day, witnessed, weighed, assigned. A name without a journey. A witness without the walk that makes witnessing possible. Folklore in these hills has a phrase for such arrivals. Guests who walked no path. At the tavern, they say it with a grin, meaning strangers from out of town. But in the quiet rooms, it carries an edge, a presence that appears without footsteps, a guest that leaves no impression in snow. The ledger did not mean to invoke that phrase. It did anyway. The line for Mary's child carries an identifier, 13B. 2 pages later, at the tally of totals, the same line is recoded, 03V. This is not a slip of hand. The shapes are too deliberate. The 1 is crossed clean, the B looped with intent, and yet, in the margin, the replacement stands, sharper, narrower, 03V. It is the only line in the ledger to undergo such mutation. When we overlay thin paper against thin paper, the pressure of the 1 and the loop of the B are still visible beneath the V. One number displaced by another without erasure, without apology. Numbers that mutate are like names in fairy tales, unstable, subject to bargains and swaps. A child christened one thing at the hearth, recorded another at the font, and by the time the census comes called something else again. Not a lie exactly, a recoding, a way for the system to keep its shape even if the child's shape resists. At the bottom of page 41, the clerk draws a line, thick and certain. The sum reads 5 births for the week, yet when we count the visible entries, there are only 4. Under lampblack, a faint dent curls where the 5th should be, a line that was pressed and not inked, a ledger that insists on a number larger than the stories it can produce. The county account book, stored in the next drawer, confirms the sum. Payment requisitioned for 5 births, not 4. Somewhere between hand and board, hesitation became arithmetic, and arithmetic became subsidy. The page does not blush at this. It simply waits for us to notice that the fibres know more than the ink. Mary appears nowhere else in the ledger. No surname, no residence, no following year. Only this single line. Mary, seen. The word seen is unusual. Standard form uses attended. Here the clerk substitutes a word that distances itself from action. Seen as in observed at a distance. Seen as in glimpsed, but not assisted. What does it mean to record a mother as seen, a child as born, when no midwife travelled, no surname was written, no subsequent entry confirms her? To see without witnessing is to invent. Folklore again creeps beside the desk. They say there are cabins in the hills where a mother can be glimpsed at dusk with a child on her hip, but no one remembers her name, and the child does not age. They do not call these apparitions ghosts. They call them neighbours who forgot to move on. The ledger, in its dry ink, repeats the pattern without meaning to. A mother glimpsed, a child assigned, neither anchored. If we let the book stand alone, it declares its entries true. But documents never stand alone. They lean on their neighbours. And when we ask the travel log, it shakes its head. When we ask the census, it stammers. When we ask the midwife, it writes, not seen, yet signed. Each contradiction is small. Each by itself could be waved away as error, fatigue, oversight. Together they build a chorus that says, this child exists on paper, and only on paper. The pressure marks tell us so. The missing journeys tell us so. The codes that mutate tell us so. The totals that exceed tell us so. And most of all, the word, seen where attended should be. A word that knows it is standing too far from the body it claims. The desk under our wrists holds these contradictions without protest. As if accustomed to housing both truth and invention, it does not tilt under their weight. But we feel the wood's complicity. A surface that learns to welcome hesitation becomes a co-author. The oak has rubbed itself smooth to make room for a hand that sometimes pressed names too hard, names it did not believe in enough to ink. The ledger isn't alone in this. The room itself has trained to receive inventions as if they were facts. The first record, then, is not a birth. It is a paradox, a child inscribed without journey, a name dented without ink, a total that does not count, a witness who was not present. It is the beginning of a system learning to pay itself with ghosts, and it leaves us with a refrain that will echo across other books. Not assigned. The first record insists on its own truth, but the silence of its neighbours speaks louder. When the clerk signed Mary's line, another set of pages already existed across town. A midwife kept her own register, stitched in cloth, its margins crowded with small notes. Most days she wrote in plain tally, hour, weight, mother's name. But on the day the ledger calls March 3rd, she left a different mark. No name, no number, no hour. Only one sentence, tight and angled, pressed between two ordinary entries. Child not seen, yet signed. She underlined the word not, as if she too could not quite accept it without reinforcement. The town census, collected that same year, compounds the doubt. In the margin beside the family count, a clerk's hand adds a word this office was not trained to use. Eligible. Not male, not female, not born, not dead. Eligible. A word that belongs to budgets, not bodies. Eligible for rations. Eligible for settlement funds. Eligible for apportionment. A word that, once written in a census, invites money into the county whether or not a cradle ever held breath. The family count rises by 1. The family itself never confirms the rise. Then comes a deposition, years later, by a man named Elijah, who served as neighbor and witness. Asked under oath how many children Mary bore, he swore to 3, then faltered, then corrected himself. 2. He was pressed again. He insisted. 2. The clerk recorded his testimony, but in the margin another hand added a strange annotation, memory contested, as though the act of remembering had itself become a thing to dispute. Even the condolence letters betray the fracture. One written to Mary's kin after a harsh winter speaks in curious terms. The quiet one walks your garden row like a shadow. I send prayers for the ones you keep close, and for the one who drifts. A line so odd it almost reads as poetry, yet there it is, folded with the others, addressed and dated, placed among the papers that do not align. Every contradiction stands apart, like stones scattered in a field. But when we step back, we see them forming a shape. The ledger says one thing, the midwife another. The census borrows a word from budgets. The neighbor cannot keep his numbers straight. The condolence letter speaks of a presence no one dares to name. One by one they could be dismissed. Together, they confirm the fracture at the core, a child written into existence on paper, yet absent in every place where presence should matter. The folklore of these hills has always known how silence moves. They tell of children who slip between barns at dusk, never aging, never speaking, always just far enough away that you cannot name them yours. To some, these are cautionary tales about inattentive mothers. To others, they are warnings about naming what should remain unnamed. But in truth, they are simply metaphors for what happens when record-keeping replaces memory. The system invents a child and, once invented, refuses to let go. The refrain begins to echo here. Not assigned. Written as if assigned, but in truth never placed, never confirmed, never witnessed. Not assigned yet tallied. Not assigned yet eligible. Not assigned yet funded. The county learns that silence can be its own perfect ward. A child who never cries never disrupts the system. A line that only exists in ink never requires a cradle, a meal, a burial. The quiet ones become the easiest to keep. And so the second record does not correct the first. It confirms its impossibility by surrounding it with silence, with hesitation, with contradictions that fail to resolve. It is not one voice against another. It is a chorus, discordant, insisting that what the ledger says is not what the world remembers. The technician's notes are brief, almost embarrassed. He was asked to confirm that the entries in the ledger behaved like all the others. Ink should sit on top of fibre. Pressure should flatten, then vanish. Light should show what the eye already knows. But when he set the book under the lamp and raked the angle low, something happened that a county clerk would never record. The ink held still, but the pressure did not. Names that had never been inked returned under the powder, rising from the paper like bruises. One curve shaped itself into a J, a faint valley where no pen had travelled. Another line suggested an M, stopped midway, abandoned, Yet still impressed into the pulp, dust settled into grooves that memory carried even when the clerk refused. Under the soft breath of the technician, the powder lifted, then resettled, and the names that did not exist insisted again. He wrote what he could allow himself, indentations present, inconclusive, but the private margin note, still faint, said more. Pressure remembers, ink denies. That is not the language of a test. That is the language of someone who has seen a page argue with itself. The second test came with chemicals, a reagent meant to confirm the use of iron gall, the ink of record. Applied gently, it should have bloomed brown, predictable and dull. Instead, it bled blue, then flared red, as if deciding and undeciding. The reaction startled him. He tried it again on a control slip, which behaved as it should, only the ledger resisted its category. Not iron gall, not stable, not something he could name without risking the report. In his final line, he did not use the word impossible. He wrote, unusual variance. Further observations suspended. Suspended, as though the page itself were caught between two verdicts, like a child neither born nor dead, present nor absent, assigned nor erased, and the refrain evolves once more. Not assigned becomes not aligned. The chemistry refuses to align with expectation. The pressure refuses to align with ink. The ledger refuses to align with its neighbors. Each surface, each test, each fiber insists on remaining out of step. The myth that hovers beside the desk knows this rhythm well. Stories of revenants in these hills often speak not of bodies returned, but of names that keep appearing. Names written on barn walls, names whispered in wells, names carved in beams long after the family has left. They are not hauntings, they are repetitions. The page becomes like that. It rehearses names it was never meant to hold, pressing them silently into itself, waiting for someone with the right light, the right dust, the right hesitation to let them surface. So the forensic beat does not solve, it unsettles. It confirms that even science, even procedure, even a chemical meant to behave predictably, can be drawn into the ledger's paradox. Ink that turns red where it should turn brown. Fibers that lift names no hand dares to claim. A system that prefers variance to void because variance can still be counted. Not aligned, not corrected, still processing. The words begin to change as the file breathes, and in that breath, the room itself seems to remember more than the clerk, more than the technician, more than the board that requisitioned 5 berths. When only 4 could be found, the file has chosen its refusal. It will not erase. It will not align. It will stay. The refrain doesn't stay in one book. It drifts as if carried on carbon dust from desk to desk. First it appears in the ledger itself, the faint annotation at the end of a column where the clerk should have written nothing more than a sum. Instead, in small letters angled against the grain, it reads, "Not assigned," a phrase that does not belong in a tally, yet there it sits, as though the page whispered back to the pen. Weeks later, in the census margin, another hand repeats it differently. Not aligned. The figures add, but the rows do not meet. Families, recorded in one place, vanish in another. Still, the totals satisfy the board. The word explains nothing. It only insists. Not aligned. It is stamped faintly at the side like an incantation. Months later, in a court memo tied to relief funds, the wording shifts again. Still processing. A phrase borrowed from bureaucrats in larger cities, imported here without context, pasted into a rural file where no machinery churns and no processing exists. Still processing. As if a child could be held in suspension, Not born, not buried, simply awaiting completion. The echo builds across 3 surfaces: ledger, census, court. Each refrains, each mutates. Not assigned, not aligned, still processing. Words repeated, until repetition itself becomes proof. Proof not of a child, but of a system that makes reality by writing the same line often enough. Folklore has always known this rhythm. Old stories warn that if a name is spoken 3 times in the wrong place, it begins to live, not as flesh, but as obligation. A household where the name is said must set a plate, must keep a bed, must honor a presence that never eats, never sleeps, never grows. The echo across these pages works the same way. Speak the absence often enough, and absence becomes its own assignment. The clerks who wrote these words likely believed they were only correcting themselves. One phrase to note hesitation, one phrase to excuse arithmetic, one phrase to defer responsibility. But together they form a pattern more enduring than any single name could. Children may grow and pass, but phrases repeat. And once the system finds comfort in a phrase, it will carry it forward into every book, every year, every budget. We begin to see the refrain less as error and more as liturgy, not assigned, not aligned, still processing, each one a small prayer that absolves the office of certainty, each one an incantation that keeps the file alive by refusing to close it, and behind them, always, the silence of the cradle, the absence of the journey, the hesitation of the hand. This is how systems become myth, not through grand declarations, but through the quiet repetition of words that no one questions. Words that keep being written until they carve grooves in the paper, until they train the oak of the desk to expect them, until the very air of the room carries them forward. Not assigned, not aligned, still processing. The echo lingers longer than the life it pretends to record, and it teaches us that even silence can be productive, if only to the numbers that count it. The system reveals itself slowly, like handwriting that grows heavier over the course of a page. At first, it looks like an accident, a child recorded, without witness, a number pressed but not inked, a travel log missing a day. Each anomaly could be dismissed. But repetition is never accident. Repetition is method. And method, in this case, is how a county taught itself to survive by writing what it could not see. A name in a ledger was more than a record. It was currency. Every child meant entitlement, apportionment from the state, relief from the county, coffers, claims for bread, for schooling, for infrastructure. The more lives on paper, the stronger the county's argument for resources. And so the book became not only a mirror of life, but a tool to extend it beyond its edges. A ledger that wrote 5 when 4 were born was not a mistake. It was an investment. The mechanism is simple. The state does not visit every cabin. It trusts the books. Auditors count columns, not cradles. Eligibility becomes proof. A number, once written, is treated as a mouth, a body, a citizen. Funds flow accordingly, and in that flow, hesitation pays. The midwife might note not seen, yet signed, but the county accepts the signature and tallies it. Because one more child, in ink, is one more claim, one more coin, one more reason to extend favor. Silence, which should trouble a system, instead becomes its asset. A silent child is the easiest to keep. No cradle to tend, no illness to treat, no grave to dig. Just a line in a book that justifies money without demanding care. The refrain mutates to reflect this comfort. Not assigned, not aligned, still processing. Each variation a way of saying the same thing. Keep the number, defer the question. Still processing means active. Active means funded. And funded means survival for the institution, if not for the people it pretends to count. Donor tranquility follows. To the eyes of benefactors and boards, a growing county is a healthy county. Growth means stability. A census that rises reassures, even if it rises with names that never breathed. Clerks who can produce growth are not censured, they are trusted. A file that stretches beyond truth becomes evidence of competence, not deceit. The system rewards those who can multiply the quiet. In this way, the mechanism learns to prefer ghosts. Flesh is troublesome. It dies. It complains. It demands. Paper is obedient. Paper never grows ill, never eats, never disobeys. A paper child can be held forever in perfect infancy, a permanent source of eligibility. And so the ledger invents its own changelings, not the folkloric child left by something uncanny in a cradle, but a child created by arithmetic, not born, not buried, only filed. And once a name is filed, it cannot be unfiled without cost. Erasure is a kind of death, and death would invite scrutiny. To admit error would mean to repay, to unravel, to confess that numbers were never lives. The board would rather let hesitation stand, let silence repeat, let words, like still processing, carry the weight of doubt. The system discovers that the safest way to endure is not to correct, but to defer indefinitely. This is how the villain enters, not as a person with malice, but as a process with incentive. The clerk is only a hand. The midwife is only a witness. The true villain is arithmetic aligned with funding, eligibility aligned with existence. The villain is the logic that makes it profitable to write what never lived and costly to erase. If a file draws a person, the person cannot redraw the file. That is the thesis the system writes in silence, and silence is the most convincing ink. And so, by 1860 in Vermont, a county had learned to keep itself alive with paper ghosts, not through superstition, but through subsidy, not through belief, but through bureaucracy, a system that forgot how to forget because forgetting would mean losing what had already been claimed. Numbers that hold get paid, numbers that move get questioned, and so the safest number is the one that never lived, because it will never move. The drawer breathes as we pull it forward, as though it has grown accustomed to being opened against its will. Inside, the last piece is weight, not to clarify, but to remind. Residue never resolves, it lingers, the aftertaste of a system that chose invention over absence. The first residue lies beneath the fibers of the birth ledger itself. If you hold the page to light, 3 shallow dents rise where no ink ever settled. They do not form full names, only beginnings. A J that curves into nothing, an M that halts before its second peak, a half circle that could be an O or only hesitation, pressed too hard. They remain invisible until dust or light makes them speak. Kept, not kept, still recorded. A triplet of ghosts the clerk's hand began and abandoned, but the paper refused to forget. The second residue lives not in paper, but in steel. On the underside of the drawer, etched shallowly into metal older than the cabinet's paint, is a line carved by another hand. It does not name, it instructs. Don't close the file. Perhaps a joke among clerks, perhaps frustration from someone who could not reconcile numbers, or perhaps simply the cabinet itself learning the refrain of those who touched it. Words become grooves, grooves become memory, memory becomes mechanism. Even the furniture learns to resist forgetting. The third, residue waits in the photograph tucked where it does not belong, a cabinet card of a family arranged stiffly before their door. It should be yellow by now, fogged at the edges, silver fading into dust. But when the light finds it, the opposite happens. The image darkens, swallowing detail, then returns exactly as it began. Not fading, not aging, but rehearsing itself. The technician's notes refused to call it impossible. He wrote only, "Image unchanged." Yet unchanged is not comfort. It is refusal. A photograph that will not alter is a photograph that pretends time never passed. All three residues insist on the same lesson: paper, steel, image. Each chooses persistence over closure. The ledger refuses to erase. The drawer refuses to seal. The photograph refuses to decay. And together they reveal the harm. This was never about children. It was about numbers that became more valuable than bodies. Numbers that generated funds, sustained institutions, reassured donors, secured tranquility. Numbers that could not be questioned because they were silent. The file does not close because closing would expose the arithmetic. Erasing would mean confessing that a county's stability rested on names that never lived. And so silence became policy. Hesitation became subsidy. Absence became asset. This isn't a ghost story. It's about a system that forgot how to forget. We set the cover down, but the page beneath still asks for a comma instead of a period. We slide the drawer gently, and the rails sing a tired note that sounds almost like the refrain we have heard across margins. Not assigned, not aligned, still processing, still here. And now the file asks you to join it. Because files, like stories, resist being alone. Tell me where you are and what time it is now. There's comfort in knowing we sit scattered across the world, listening together to names that never lived but were never allowed to vanish. Don't close the file.